brain.
Here, we're looking at the comparison of a group of methamphetamine abusers and a group of non-drug using volunteers. The blue areas are areas where the methamphetamine abusers are not working. If you have a look at the prefrontal lobe, the central area that's so important for being able to make a decision that involves balancing reward against knowing that there's a negative consequence, you can see that that area is just turned off. But these other areas that are part of that executive center that are important in the emotional state of craving are really hot.
You've lost your ability to make decisions. At the same time, you've lit up your need, your craving. So let me ask you this. Is it possible that the methamphetamine abuser cannot decide not to take the drug that's related to addiction?
In fact, the very nature of addiction has to do with the inability to make proper decisions.
This pattern where the decision-making part is sort of turned off. Is this what happens to an addict? I can't decide, like, this is going to kill me, this is going to kill me, this is going to kill me, but I got to have it, I got to have it, I got to have it, and they can't think about the future.
But, you know, for many years, we were thinking that the best way to treat addiction was to come up with a blocker to block the high, but that didn't really work. And then the next wave of work in coming up with treatment was to reduce craving. But in fact, I think the biggest problem in drug abuse is the decision-making that you just talked about. Sure, craving occurs, but then what is someone going to do with it?
Because they're not thinking.
The part of the brain that's really critical for decision-making is just not functioning properly in the methamphetamine abuser and in drug abusers in general. One of the things that my colleagues who are treatment providers have told me is that it's very useful to take pictures like this to show people that are in treatment, and it allows the person not to feel guilty about not being able to do the right thing. It allows the person to see that there is some chemical problem that needs to recover before they get back to a state where they can make all the right decisions.
So, doctor, you look at these images all day, right? You analyze these things. If you had one thing to tell the world about your research, what would it be?
Addiction is a brain disease, no matter how the addict got there. At this point, he has a problem making decisions. The whole executive center of the brain is involved, the central area that's really needed for him to be able to make a choice when he's got a balance between a quick fix, knowing that there's a negative consequence, is something that's not happening properly.
Addiction is a brain disease.
It is.
There it is in black and white, and blue,
color,
and orange. So how do drugs affect your brain? Different drugs affect the brain in different ways. For example, cocaine molecules resemble dopamine molecules. So cocaine molecules end up binding to the receptors of the cells in such a way that prevents the cells from removing or pumping the dopamine out of the synapses. And so the brains end up with more dopamine and more pleasure. Now, it may be that the neurons in addicts' brains receive such high levels of dopamine that the cells try to adapt by reducing the number of sites to which dopamine can bind. Well, then, between hits or during withdrawal, when the addict isn't taking the drug, their brains end up having not enough dopamine after all that. So they start out taking cocaine in order to feel high, and they end up taking it in order not to feel low.
Every addict has experience with being able to start and stop it earlier in their disease. That's what makes it so difficult for them to accept that they can't later on.
Children, what do you think causes addiction to drugs in humans?
The neurons in the brain adapt and respond to excessive stimulation from the drugs, causing molecular changes that lead to cravings when the drug is not present.
That is one possibility, Mary. Tommy, what do you think?
I've read that addiction can also be traced to genetics, which when combined with trauma can lead the addict to seek relief from reality.
Perhaps, Tommy, but I believe addiction occurs when someone you love suddenly decides you're too needy and throws your clothes out on the lawn.
Gee, Mr. Sanders, I sure hope science finds a cure for that by the time I'm older.
I wouldn't count on it, Tommy.
Got a family history of addiction there, you see a genetic predisposition, there's some sort of environmental trigger, oftentimes it's trauma, set up.
What's a trauma?
Trauma would be Usually a childhood trauma is what we're talking about, and it's an experience of powerlessness in childhood, a feeling that they're threatened with not being able to survive.
We're going to run a little test here, right? We're going to have these people drink what they think is beer, but has no alcohol.
Correct. Some people think it's just a biological disease, period. But we're saying that's part of it. But the psychological factors and the social factors and the cultural factors play also a big role.
And so what do we expect to happen?
Well, we're going to see if we get a sort of a placebo effect in the sense that people, if they think they're drinking alcohol and they're in a bar setting and they're with other people, how much of the effects are due to alcohol and how much are due to the setting and the expectancy and the contact high.
Dr. George and I are now observing behind a mirror while Dr. Marlatt plays bartender.
Here's the science. I'm looking for the usual types of changes that you see in people after they have a drink, which are being a little more relaxed, being a little more sociable, perhaps a little giggly, being a little looser. Whatever you would consider. Those are the typical types of things that happen when folks normally drink alcohol. And so as a consequence, those are their expectations. And that belief is so strong that just believing that they've been drinking can stir up those effects.
So I'm going to tell you something now about what you've been drinking. Somebody asked about what brands. These were the beers. They're alcohol-free.
Ladies and gentlemen. It's really cool. You guys were carrying on like you were just drinking, you know, a lot of beer. Let me ask you this. Do you think it would change the way you drink in the future?
You could still have fun without getting drunk.
That might be one conclusion.
Yeah.
So I just noticed as soon as you guys found out, nobody's drinking.